This story takes place in August of 2013 in the mountains of southern Oregon. I am a United States Air Force Security Forces airman, which is a military policeman. My girlfriend was at work, and as a swelteringly hot day began to turn into thunderstorms, my buddy Nick, another military cop, and I decided to go explore some back roads and get out of the heat in town. Southern Oregon is crisscrossed with logging roads, some actively used, and many totally forgotten and grown over. Nick and I spent many of our days starting on roads that we knew, finding roads that we didn't, driving for hours in the mountains, eventually navigating back to paved roads. On this particular day, with storm clouds building over the mountains, we set off on a road we had never been on and began to drive into the mountains. After driving for about an hour, we hadn't seen nor heard any signs of other people in the woods. We rounded a bend in the thick fir of woods and emerged in a meadow that was totally surrounded by thick foliage. The meadow was perfectly flat and eerily still. We both noticed a strange stillness almost immediately. No birds, hardly any insect noise, no squirrels, and certainly no other people. On the far side of the meadow, right at the edge of the tree line, there was a picnic table. The table was very odd, however. It was painted bright orange, and much larger than a typical picnic table in a park. Remarking on this, Nick drove through the meadow to get a closer look. I remember being apprehensive as we approached. The whole scenario was exceptionally strange. The overall silence of the area was unsettling. It was nearly impossible to see that far into the trees, as these trees grew extremely close together. I hopped out of the passenger seat of the truck to check it out. I'm not very tall, about 5'5". Regardless, the table was ridiculously oversized and practically unusable. The seats were nearly at chest level, meaning I would have to climb up to even sit down. As I was looking at the table, Nick called me over to the truck, and I noticed he was looking back into the trees. At first, I couldn't see what he was looking at, but then I noticed a splash of color that was completely out of place in the thick trees. A small one-man tent was set back in the trees, about 50 feet from the strange table. I had an initial feeling of dread and felt certain that there was someone in the tent, and if we could see the tent, they could see us. There were no campgrounds in the area, no people, no main roads, for miles. Surely, someone camping so remotely would be, at the very least, a strange person. However, as we observed the tent, we didn't see any movement or hear any sounds coming from it. Nick suggested I call out. I didn't want to, but I did. "Hey, anyone in there?" I yelled. No reply. Feeling completely on edge, Nick and I thought about driving away and leaving this strange area, but we began to fear the worst. What if there was a body in the tent? What if somebody had gotten kidnapped? Foolish, I know, but we thought all the same. After some debate, we decided to have Nick turn the truck around and drive away from the camp. Should we need to leave in a hurry, he would be waiting behind the wheel. With my heart pounding, I started walking through the trees towards the tent. I was totally keyed up with my senses on full alert. When I reached the supposed campsite, several things struck me as odd. Backpacks were scattered all over. No fire had been built, no wood collected. The tent was literally full of backpacks and women's clothing. Full of dread, I turned around and left. As I left, I heard Nick start yelling, "Dude, hurry up, come on, let's go. We need to get the hell out of here right now." Not knowing why he was yelling, I ran back to the truck. When I broke out of the trees, I saw a beat-up old Ford Taurus on the road, blocking us from leaving the meadow. I immediately leapt into the passenger seat, and Nick floored the gas pedal. The car was occupied by 2 men, and a third person was laying against the window in the back. As we drove across the meadow, the other driver attempted to block us from the road, but Nick drove around them and accelerated the way he came from. I looked back, and I saw the car attempting to turn around on the narrow road. Nick drove like a madman, and though I was honestly terrified that they would catch up, we hit the highway without seeing the car again. I still don't know if the person in the back was a male or female. I called the state police, and they promised to send a trooper out to check out the scene. However, I received a call the next day from a trooper stating that the campsite, the backpacks, and the woman's clothing were all gone, though he could tell that people had been in the area. However, the strange table had still been there. I've never returned to the area, and definitely don't intend to. This particular event happened almost a year ago, sometime in mid-October. A couple of friends and I were driving out to visit an old friend of ours from high school, George, who now lived about an hour out of the city. We spent the whole day with him, and it was really late when we finally decided to start the drive back home. My friend Lisa was passed out in the passenger seat. She had a few drinks and decided to spend the ride home asleep. My other friend Sam was sitting in the back seat behind Lisa and was playing a game on her smartphone. I, of course, was driving. I was following the GPS instructions back to the freeway. At that moment, we were driving down a dark street with thick trees bordering both sides. Everything was pretty peaceful, with the only sounds I could hear being of the car moving along the road and the radio on low volume. Suddenly, my car let out a loud jolt and it felt as if I had hit something. Sam let out a shocked scream while Lisa remained dead asleep. I slammed on the brakes and the car came to a halt. I was breathing heavily when I asked what the hell had just happened. Sam peered out through the back window and gasped. She turned to me with an angry look on her face and shouted that I had just hit a dog. I looked through the back window and sure enough, a dog was lying there in the road a few yards behind the car. Sam is a pretty big animal lover, so I wasn't surprised to see her get pissed at me. She was about to open her door and rush to the animal's aid when I stopped her. Once I'd gotten over the shock of running over a dog, I got a feeling in my gut that told me something was off. I've always considered myself to be a very attentive and safe driver. My eyes were on the road at all times, and I distinctly remember not seeing any dog in the road prior to the car jolting. Yes, it was dark, but I'm sure I would have at least seen the dog in the headlights before hitting it. I looked through the back window and took a closer look at the dog, or at least as much as I could make out of the reddish light coming from my taillights. It was a fairly big dog, at least a golden retriever, something like that. One particular detail that caught my attention though, I could see the dog's tail wagging. Now, I'm no expert on mannerisms of animals, but I was sure the last thing a dog would be doing after being hit by a car would be wagging its tail. After a moment of thought, I pressed my foot down on the accelerator and sped off. Sam snapped at me and ordered me to turn around, but I told her that something was wrong with the whole situation. She continued to argue with me, but she fell silent as she turned back towards the back window. She asked, "What the hell?" with a shaken voice. I looked in the rearview mirror. Though it was dark, I was able to make out the silhouettes of 3 large figures emerging from the trees on the side of the road. The dog was now up on its feet, jumping around joyfully. The 3 figures looked in our direction as I pressed my foot down on the gas harder and sped off. Sam and I remained silent for the rest of the ride home. It wasn't until a few days later that we told Lisa about it. We've been back to visit George a few times, but we always made sure to leave before sunset. Still, I dread to think about what would have happened if we had gotten out of the car.